Oops.
They'll blanket you in Wi-Fi and profit off the radiation. Congregation collecting the people for that Satan. I keeps it blazing, cause I can read between the lines. I ain't blind, we unwind what they're really saying. Genetically modify what you're tasting. Don't need that cottage promise, so now you live up in your mom's basement. Redesign time so your mind is always wasted. Programmed to crave the basics. Keep the beta in stasis. Pay the state, kid. You're in debt for being born. Messengers are more than just the price for being warned. Don't be alarmed, disconnect from their machinations. Stop subscribing to the folly of own nations. Bone breaking ain't the answer, cause they seek the ownership of souls. Spread the seeds and watch them grow. Break the chains of control. Break the chains of control.
So we, eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful friends, tonight on Rogueways we are in for a tale of great sadness and grief, of travel to another realm, and of triumphant return to miraculous healing and living from our guest, who has long been celebrated and featured as an old homes expert, and is now recreated as a near-death miracle, returned to bring us all the messages we've been dying to hear, pun intended. Rose Thornton, welcome to Rogueways. How are you doing tonight?
I'm well, thank you.
That is excellent to hear. I'm excited to get into your story. And before we do that, I want to let the audience know that December meditations are starting this Thursday. If you want to join for the month of meditations, we do it twice a week, so you can join us. And if you can make it live on Sundays and Thursdays at 5 p.m. Mountain, that's excellent. And if you can't, you'll be emailed the link every time, so you can go view it and download it and keep it. Do it as many times as you want. So you don't have to be there live with us either. Today was a powerful one. Every time we do it, it's really powerful. These are source guided. They're inspired in the moment in the day itself. I am given the meditation to bring to you, and so they're always different and unique and powerful. And I hope to see you all there meditating with us. And also brighter. I almost said brighter you. One Day of Brightness is coming up on December 19th. So we're just a few weeks away from this amazing day. We have Phoenix Aurelius, we have Noriana Diesel, we have Catherine O'Shea and myself filling out the day for you this winter solstice. And it's going to be so beautiful, uplifting, healing, and educational. And I cannot wait to see you there. There should still be some spots left. A lot of people have been grabbing their spots. So if you've been waiting, don't wait any longer. It is still at its lower early bird price for another couple days before it jumps up to its non-early bird price. So there's another motivation for you to grab your spot. I can't wait to be there with you and to experience that with all of you. We're going to keep this the brightest winter yet. And Rose, I always start with a pointless question of the episode, and I'm really actually intrigued by your old house expert status because I love old houses. I bought old houses, I've sold old houses, I've tried to refurbish them as best I can, and I'm just wondering, what's your favorite thing about old houses?
Boy,
there's too many.
My favorite thing. The craftsmanship of early 20th century housing is pretty remarkable. And it's not just the craftsmanship, but the quality of building materials. If you compare the weight of a 2x4 in 1910 or 1920 to the weight of a 2x4 today, it's incredible because we're growing trees very, very fast, the hybrids and all kinds of stuff. But back in the day, trees grew naturally in very dense forests, competing for sunlight, nutrients, water. So they grew very, very, very slowly, and that creates a very tight wood grain and a very dense wood, which makes it much stronger.
I never realized that. I knew the 2x4 was now actually like 1.7 by 3.8 or something like that's not even a 2x4 anymore. But I didn't realize the actual wood had grown in a way that made it less quality and less dense. That's amazing.
It's true.
If you go into an old house, even if there's kind of like some, dusty, maybe raw, some things are broken, you can just feel that it's more solidly constructed and dense. You can hear less from outside. And even if there's not any insulation, it's really interesting. And it's one of the things I love about old houses. I feel like they're going to keep lasting even when these things we've built long after they were built are in dust in the ground, Well, that's amazing. So was that always your passion when you were a kid? Were you always aiming for becoming an old house expert before you had your miraculous transformation? Or was it just something that happened?
Well, that's actually a really good question. My whole life, I've been very intrigued by spiritual, metaphysical things. And I was born and raised as a Christian Scientist, and we rely heavily on spiritual healing,
Wow.
which is really, very outside of the box, certainly in the 60s when I was raised. And in fact, started to watch a movie tonight called Resurrection with Ellen Bernstein and Sam Shepard. I think it was in 1980 or 81 it came out. And it was a story of a woman's near-death experience. And after she came back from the dead, she had some remarkable abilities. And part of this experience is as I was floating away from my body after I had died. And by the way, I prefer to call it a temporary death experience
That
because
makes more
I
sense.
wasn't near death.
No, you were
Yeah,
there. Yeah.
near death is when you're on an airplane and things go bad and you're plummeting to the earth and somehow at the last minute it's saved. That's near death. But temporary death, I crossed over and came back. But in that
Yeah.
experience, one of the things that was revealed to me is I had died as an infant and that I had come back from that because ever
Wow.
since Raymond Moody's book came out in, gosh, I think it was 72 or 73, Life After Life, I've been reading everything I could get my hands on about near-death experiences. And after I came back from this, in fact, they put me in an ambulance and rushed me to the hospital after I was resuscitated. One of my very first thoughts was this wasn't anything like the typical near-death experience. And I've since learned that the typical near-death experience is kind of a non sequitur, that Hollywood portrays it a certain way, but people's experiences vary widely.
Wow. Yeah. That is actually similar. It's like from what I've gathered so far, and there's a lot of similarities, but it's also always unique. There's
It is.
yeah.
And as we'll talk about in a bit, mine really felt tailor made for my special circumstances. And but that was so funny because I mean I have literally you could not name a near death experience book that I had not read. And so coming back from this, I
You're like,
thought,
huh.
yeah, I didn't have the tunnel, I didn't see relatives, and yet I mean there's no doubt my heart stopped and I passed on. So it was pretty interesting to me. And yet, one of the fascinating things in this experience, we'll talk about this in a minute, I guess, but I ended up in a white room. And that's where I talk with spiritual beings. And there was a lot of discussion and a lot of things that were revealed and I learned and all that. Well, I get a lot of emails and a lot of different requests from folks, but I've probably had a dozen people come up to me and say that they had an NDE and they also ended up in a white room, much like I have described. So that is not that uncommon an experience. It's just, I guess Hollywood hasn't picked up on it.
Yeah. Hollywood hasn't picked up on most things that are real.
That is true.
Well, I have weird white room experiences too, but they're not connected with near death, but they are connected with people who are dead. So that's an interesting sort of crossover there. When you died as an infant or as a young person, you had no record of this or knowledge of this until you had your second death experience?
Well, it was pretty interesting because you had asked about my interest in old houses going back to childhood. I always did love old houses, but I had always felt very close to the angels and I could hear things that other people couldn't hear and see things other people couldn't see. And my mother told me early on that I was very sensitive and she said it's okay to be sensitive. And my family, it's funny, my family every now and then they would say, has Aunt Sally passed? And I'd say, no, I would have known. I would have seen her. And so even the family knew back in the day that I was very different. But, one of my fondest memories, I was in second grade in elementary school and we were let out for recess and all the kids run out to the equipment and run out and play in the field. And they were building a brand new house at the edge of the playground, on a private residential street. And every day I'd run out and I'd cling to that chain link fence and just study what they were doing over there and watching the contractors put up the framing and the roofing shingles and how did they put in those windows and the day the electricians came. And I would try to gather my little playground buddies and say, look what they're doing over there. They're building a house. And they were like, what is wrong with
Like,
you?
who cares?
So yeah, from I know. So from an early age, I found the whole construction thing utterly fascinating. So I guess I had dovetailing interest of both construction and old houses as well as spiritual things. And to answer your question about infant, yeah, my mom told me in my 30s when I had children of my own, she told me that I had been given up for dead as a newborn baby,
Wow.
and that I was resuscitated. Well, she didn't say I was resuscitated. She said I was healed, and nobody quite knew how. It was considered a miraculous healing by the hospital.
Wow.
And in my own experience at age 59, what I was told was that I hadn't come close to death, that I had actually crossed over and been sent back. And that
Again.
explained a lot.
Wow, yeah, that does explain a lot. It also makes me wonder, were you trying to get out of here? Were you like, not this again?
I
God.
think I was. And the thing about one of my first experiences when I popped out of my body, because I mean, it's amazing how the soul is so intelligent and the soul has a knowing. But one of my first thoughts was, I'm out. I'm clear. It's over. I did my time. And I had been dealing mightily with suicidal ideations. I had been greatly tempted by thoughts of suicide.
Mm.
And I remember one of my first thoughts was, I didn't do this. I got let out. In fact, the way I thought of it in my own mind was early release for good behavior.
I'm
I felt
free.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, I got out. It's time served. I'm gone. So, and people are
Relate.
so funny. They say, "Oh, you must have wanted to come back." I had zero intention of coming back. My predominant emotion throughout the whole thing was gratitude
Mm.
that it was over and I had not done this to myself. My children would not have to have the burden of a mother that had killed herself. Um, because one of the things after, I guess we should start at the beginning, but I married a man I thought was the love of my life. He was handsome, he was sophisticated, he was educated, he was well traveled, he was a successful attorney, and my life looked pretty sweet, I thought.
Was he
And
a
then
Christian Scientist as well? Or did you
he was
share? No.
not. He was an atheist, which was
Oh,
actually he was an agnostic, which was a pretty interesting mingling of
yeah.
spiritual belief systems or lack thereof.
Really?
And then pretty much out of the blue, to say the least, he came home one day for lunch and put a gun in his mouth and ended his life.
Were you
And
there?
I was not. I was
Wow.
actually out of town at the time, and then I had to struggle with getting home to deal
Wow.
with things. So I lost my mind, pretty much had a psychotic break. Our last communication had been some text messages, which were pretty horrible. And he had started an argument with me over a jugular issue, and it went bad fast, and then he hung up and did this thing. So it was, I mean, I walked around for, about 2 years feeling like I had a lot of responsibility. And yet the fact is, and something I want to say up front, anyone who's been near anybody who ends their own life, there's nothing you could have done to make it happen. And there's probably nothing you could have done to stop it.
Thank
And
you.
suicide prevention to me is such BS.
Yeah.
You know, maybe with a kid that's lost their way,
Yeah.
maybe it's a help, but you get to be an adult. Uh, Suicide prevention, I hate it. I hate the suicide prevention day and month and all of it because what it's saying is, oh, I bet there were signs. There
Mhm.
was probably something you could have, there must have been
Yeah. It's
something.
almost like a guilt trip. You guys
It's,
failed. We're going to do
yeah,
better. Yeah.
it's survivors. It's victim blaming at its absolute
Good
worst.
point.
There can't be a worse. And the American Psychological Association, I don't know what year this was, but I think it's probably 10 years ago or so. They reconciled or compared the death of a close loved one, a husband or a child, to suicide in terms of emotional trauma on par with a concentration camp experience. So in other words, it is the most severe trauma a human being can know on this earth is to have somebody do this. So I lost my mind. I've always been a sensitive soul
Yeah.
and a writer, and I lost my mind. And I guess I had a psychotic break and kind of went bye bye for a while and became addicted to prescription drugs, and which for a Christian Scientist is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Um, and then I abused alcohol. Started the day with a glass of whiskey
Mm.
and some benzos to follow,
Wow.
and then I just kept going down and down and down. Ended up living out of my car briefly. And the thing was that was not economic. It was I couldn't get comfortable anywhere. I felt like a wounded dog. I felt like a dog that had been shot in the abdomen. I just couldn't get comfortable anywhere. And I found in my car, I found that I was very comfortable, and I couldn't live in the house anymore. So I actually lived with different people at different times, but I was very disruptive to the household because I would wake up screaming from the most horrific nightmares. I had recurring nightmares where I saw him do this, and I tried to tackle him, tried to get the gun away, tried to stop it. So I saw my husband kill himself, in nightmares again and again and again and again and again.
Mm.
And so that's how I came to end up in my car briefly. And that's when a friend stepped in and she said, "You're too comfortable in that car. You're coming home with me."
Mm.
And I said, "No, I'm not." And she said, "Yes, you are." And she said, "Try it for one night," which was actually inspired. So I went home with her one night and it was okay. And that woman, I lived with her for 4 months and she worked horrible hours. She was a real estate agent, and she every night at the end of her workday, which sometimes was 8 o'clock at night and sometimes was 11 at night, she would come into my room, and I'm in her house. I'm living in her house. She's feeding me and taking care of me. And she would stand at the foot of my bed and pray. And she did that every night
Mhm.
for 4 months.
What a
and it was
beautiful
life
soul.
changing. It was. And she even had her church. It was a little church in Windsor, Virginia. She even had her church keep me in prayer for months, absolute months. And then I had a website, searshomes.org, because I had been very involved in the Sears House thing. And I mean, it's a very popular website. It had millions of hits. And I would just post at that website, I'm sinking beneath the waves. Please pray for me. And boy, you wouldn't believe how people just rallied. And the comments, I lived on those comments. People would say, I'm praying the rosary for you, or I pray for you every day, or I light a candle for you. And too many times to count, I would lie in bed and I would open up that website on my phone and I would just lie in bed and read the comments. And I would hold that phone literally to my heart and I would tell myself, no matter how bad things are, somebody's praying for you right now, and you're going to survive this. And I couldn't imagine how, but I thought somehow somebody loves me enough, somebody cares enough, somebody is godly and good enough that they are praying for me. And it just meant the world to me. And I tried to just grab onto that and hang on to that with both hands.
Well, you're
Uh,
good enough to ask for it too, you know? Like
oh
that's
man,
suicide prevention is when you reach out and you ask for what you need.
that that's a very good point. And yet things just kept getting worse. You know, one if we want to talk about suicide prevention, widows and widowers who lost a spouse to suicide are 12 to 48 times more likely, depending on whose statistics you believe, to end their own lives. And I'm in a Facebook group of suicide survivors, and I know in the time I've been in that group, already 3 women have ended their lives. So if we want to talk about identifying a specific at-risk group, find somebody whose husband off themselves, and then reach out to them. And more than reach out, show up and say, I don't want you to end your life. I know you're thinking about it. And they are. When somebody loses somebody that close to suicide, they're thinking about it.
Yeah.
The smartest person to know, the person you love the most, the person you care about the most, they decided this was a good solution. I think with very few exceptions, every survivor has considered it. So, but we don't. I became a leper. My husband had been a litigator. I had been a writer with some renown. I'd been on national television repeatedly, and I became a societal leper. And people were so scared of this trauma somehow ending up in their life. And I mean, you see them when you're standing at the visitation and closed casket, and long line of people come up to greet the widow, and you see the spouses hug each other a little tighter as they walk past the casket because they're terrified. So that was my life, and I became very I figured out how to end my life. I had a plan, I had a means, I had a place, and I knew better than to tell a single soul. So I kept it to myself. And when the days got really bad, I would tell myself, hang on for 24 hours. And if it's not better in 24 hours, go do the thing you've planned to do. Um, and nobody could have stopped me, nobody could have stopped me. And so I had 3 prayers every night. And my first prayer was, uh, heal me or let me go. I can't continue to live in this state. I had terrible PTSD to the point that, gosh, I think about 2.5 years out, I was at a local coffee place and sitting there sipping on a hot chocolate, and the wind caught a door behind me and the door slammed and it made a tremendous bang. And I jumped up out of my seat and I screamed, but I'm by myself, and I screamed, what the F is wrong with you? And there were children and people, and everyone turned and gasped. And I took advantage of that door and exited very quickly. And so I had to be very careful about where I went and what I did, because I couldn't put myself in a situation that could be compromising. So I asked God to heal me or let me go. I had lost my friends. My house was gone. I lost everything a person can lose. And then my second prayer was that I was having so much trouble with decisions. There's so many decisions to make. Keep the house, sell the house. What do you do with the house? What do you do with the bank accounts? What do you do about everything? What do you do about your own circumstances? Shortly before his death, I had a recurring dream that my husband had died suddenly, and I ended up living in a filthy, roach-infested apartment. And in the dream, I would sob and think, how did I go from my beautiful house on the lake to this filthy, filthy place?
Wow.
And yet that kind of became my reality.
Wow.
So I think I was getting little nudges from the divine of what was coming. I had that dream, must have been 25 times. And every time I'd wake up and my husband would be sleeping beside me, and I'd shake him awake, and he'd say, I'm not going anywhere, which was a lie. He had this planned out well in advance. And that was tough. So my second prayer was, God, I'm so tired of decisions. Please help me with this. One of the things I did, I went out and bought 12 white polo shirts from LL Bean and 3 jeans. So every day I could reach in my closet and I could grab a white polo shirt and a pair of jeans, and I was done. I didn't have to think about what color shirt to wear. And then my third prayer was I asked God to spare me a life review. I had seen my husband's end enough, and I didn't want to see that ever again. So then came August 2018, 29 months after my husband's suicide, and I was diagnosed with stage 2 cervical cancer. And I thought, wow, what are we doing here, God? I thought it was pretty clear. Heal me or let me go. I meant quick, not slow.
Yeah.
I was devastated beyond words. And so I had a little surgical thing done.
The leap?
And by the way, it was 2 doctors. No, I had a cervical cone biopsy done.
Oh, yeah.
Because they wanted to figure out exactly how far the cancer had spread. They had diagnosed it through, first was a pap smear, and secondly was a visual exam. He saw the cancer had already spread to nearby tissue, and he said it was severe enough that it had distorted the flesh. So he did a cervical biopsy to see exactly what it was and how far it was and all that stuff. Well, after the cervical biopsy, which was supposed to be no big deal, in and out, I woke up from that. It was actually, they told me it was about a 20 to 30 minute procedure, and it took them 3 hours to awaken me from the propofol because I just was not accustomed to the world of pharmaceuticals. And they get you up off that. An RN came and got me up off the gurney and said, off you go. Time to wake up, time to go. And I went to the bathroom in preparation of getting dressed to leave, and I was bleeding profusely. And I came back and reported to the RN that I was bleeding an awful lot. And she said, once you get home and lie down, you'll be fine.
God, people are such
Turned out she was wrong.
Yeah.
And that happened 2 more times. I said, no, something's gone very wrong. I'm bleeding an awful lot. She repeated herself twice. And this was my first time in a hospital other than
Wow.
birth and babies.
Yeah.
So I did as told. I went home, got home, and I had a beautiful house with white wall-to-wall carpet. And my number one worry was bleeding on the carpet because, when you're dying, you don't want to mess up the carpet.
Yeah.
Housekeeping is such a problem.
Right.
We're also well behaved, aren't we?
Right. It's like people say when they're choking, they're like embarrassed, so they go off to choke by themselves, and that's why they
That's
die.
right.
Like
In
no,
bathrooms, I know. My mother told me that stat.
Yeah.
I know. So I stepped into my walk-in shower. I figured, I saw how much I was bleeding, and it was steady. It wasn't getting worse, wasn't getting better, but it was just really steady. So I stepped into my walk-in shower, and I leaned against the shower wall. And I'm just, no water's on. I'm just watching the blood go right down the drain. And I thought to myself, you've been asking God to heal you or let you go. Maybe this is God's mercy and God's grace. You don't have to do anything. You just have to sit down on the floor, and this won't take long. And I really thought about that. I thought, I can be out of here. So I thought about it, but I had 2 friends that had driven me home from the hospital that were in the house with me. And I thought, is that fair to them? All the people that invested all those prayers in me and all that love and all that care for me just to give up now. And boy, was it tempting just to sit down on that shower floor. Oh my goodness. But I pushed my way out of that shower and went out and told my friends I need an ambulance, and was taken to a nearby ER. Another mistake was an ER not attached to a hospital, where the doctor was so young, I swear I thought I saw play school on her stethoscope. And she made a series of more mistakes, and they sent me to my reward. And just as if bleeding to death wasn't dramatic enough, they gave me a shot of Dilaudid to grease the skids to the afterlife. They really did.
This shocks me when I hear that. I'm like, Dilaudid. Someone else just told me they got Dilaudid for something. I'm like, Dilaudid? Like that? It's
good stuff.
Meant to be for when you die.
It is a morphine derivative, and it is powerful stuff. And here I had lost so much blood, and they gave me a I don't know, triple scoop, who knows what, but they gave me a good shot of Dilaudid. And it wasn't long after that. They left a friend sitting there beside me, and the nurse and the doctor exited the room. And one of the things, the nurse, an RN, was by my side while the doctor examined me. And the RN was very motherly, had a very sweet face, and seemed very calm. I like calm people. And I grabbed her hand and I said, promise me you're not going to let me die. And she said, oh, honey, we have many solutions for this. We're not going to let you die. So I was comforted by that. And then, and it wasn't long at all. All I remember was thinking that Dilaudid is some good stuff. And then the next thing I knew, I had been in a deep, dreamless state when I died, and I awakened, literally being catapulted out of my body.
Wow.
It was very dramatic, and I knew instantly what was happening. Instantly. I mean, there was not, oh my, what's happening? It was almost jarring. It was like right up to the cusp of being jarring to feel yourself being catapulted. I've often described it as like toast out of a toaster. I just was popped out of that body. And it really felt like, and this was so memorable, it seemed like there was a silver sinewy cord from the crown of my head to the heel of my feet. And somebody had pulled back on it like an archer's bow and popped it. And when that thing hit my back, it felt like that's when I was catapulted away from this body. And yet I also heard a sound like a plop when I separated from the body. So I am floating away, and I was just jubilant. I was so happy. I was like, I know what's going on. I'm dying. I'm dying. And as I'm moving through this experience, actually, my very first thought was, my heart has stopped. And I thought, how do I know that? I thought, I don't know how I know that, but I know that's right. And then I thought, boy, won't everybody be surprised? Nobody saw this coming, did they? And then I thought, I'm dying. And then my next thought was, actually, you're not dying, you're dead. And as a lifelong writer, when you're going on to your reward, the most important thing is correcting your tense.
Yeah.
And I thought it was hysterical. And I laughed out loud in this new experience, still floating away from my body. I laughed out loud. And I thought, I heard myself laugh, my own giggle. And I thought, every single thing I am went with me, right down to my funny little giggle. And then I thought, I don't have breath sounds. I'm pretty sure I don't have vocal cords. How am I producing sound? And I thought, I don't know. And I was talking out loud as a writer. I never talk out loud to myself. I could hear my voice, and it sounded just like it sounds now. And I remember thinking, what exactly did I leave behind on that gurney? And I thought, nothing important. And then I realized, I thought about the Bible verse, the peace that passeth all understanding. And I thought, this is the peace that Paul was talking about. I have always struggled mightily with anxiety and panic attacks and worries and woes. And I realized all that was gone. And I remember thinking, I've always wondered what I would look like with no fear, no panic, no worry, no anxiety. And I thought, this is what I look like. This is pretty neat. I thought, that's what I left behind. I left that stuff behind. And this experience, I mean, if you told me that this lasted for 2 hours or 2 days, I would have believed it. And I know that's a hard sell, but it just seemed to go on and on and on. And that thing about giggling, that impressed me deeply, because I realized that's an odd sense of humor to, crack yourself up while you're dying. And yet it was all still there, everything. And also I've made this comparison multiple times. It's like, my whole life I'd been living with a 60 amp service, and I'd gone to 100,000 amps. It's just like everything lit up, that my intellect had grown exponentially by a magnitude of too many factors to even understand. I had a comprehension and an understanding. It was like all the lights came on, and it was so profound. And early on, again, I'm still floating, and I was in blackness. Several people have said, have you seen your body? Could you see your body? I did not. I was floating away in this perfect blackness, but it was like a blackness that was actively comforting me. It was like velvety, soft, comforting, comfortable blackness. And early on in the experience, I heard, I felt the presence of somebody join me. And it was a very tall being, slightly behind me, slightly to my left. As I turned to my left to see who had joined me, and I'm in this blackness, which is kind of curious to look and see. But even as I did this, I thought, I'm looking over my left shoulder. Again, very human-esque sense of things. But as I did, I asked, couldn't see anything, but I asked, and who are you? And the voice said, you, Rosemary, you are the image and likeness. I'm the original. I thought, wow, wow. Because that's Genesis 1:26, Genesis 1:26. I thought, that's so cool. And my whole life I had been fascinated by that Bible verse. What does it mean to be made in the image and likeness of God? But that was the language. You are the image and likeness. I'm the original. And I remember thinking that would have been good to know back there, but okay, cool. On we go. And more than the words, it came with an infusion of knowledge, which is very powerful. Very, very powerful. The Bible says in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And these are those kind of words that have the power to call creation into being. I can't state that enough, how powerful these words were. So it went on, and that's in this blackness. I remember saying to, I guess, what could be described as a spiritual being or an angel, I said, I've been here before, like in conscious memory of this earth experience. I've been in this blackness before. And that's when I was told, remember, your mom told you that you were all but given up for dead as an infant, and you didn't come close to dying. You did pass, and you came back. Because that night at the hospital, 1959 was when I was born. That night at the hospital, my mother told me, again in my 30s, she said, I had been born a healthy baby, but contracted a staph infection, which turned into blood poisoning, lingered for 3 weeks, went on and on and on. And then came the afternoon, the doctor came in to see my mother and said her kidneys have failed. The rest of her organs won't be far behind. And the doctor told her, go home and focus on your 3 boys. This one's gone. So my mother went home. She called a prayer warrior friend, and the two of those ladies stayed up all night and prayed for me all through the night. And I learned later a Catholic nun came in and stayed by my little bassinet and prayed for me too, which made sense to me. I kind of thought they just shoved me off into a corner and let me go, but apparently somebody stayed right at my bedside. And by morning, everything was reversed. I was completely healed, and they let me go home that day because they said, "You're not better." They told my mother, "She's not better. She's completely healed," and there was no medical explanation whatsoever. So that experience of mom telling me that when I'm in my 30s, and then this experience of in the blackness of hearing, actually, you didn't come close to dying. You actually did. That explains so many things throughout my childhood. Why was I always the kid who, and I would say to people, you don't see that like sparkly being over there? And they'd say, no. And in fact, I was told more than once to stop talking about that. So that was my life. So in this experience of floating away from my body, there came a time when, and I don't remember the translation or the transition, I guess I should say, I ended up in a white room. And I was no longer floating, but I was in a white room and I could see. And I don't know how I got there. I mean, I don't remember I remember being in the blackness, and then I remember being in the white room. And it really felt like somebody took my batteries out, you know? Like somebody just said, okay, we're shutting down memory for a minute, and some stuff's going to happen.
Might be painful.
And then you're going to be in a white room.
Yeah, well.
Well, I wonder if that's when I saw my mother. My mother passed many, 20 plus years ago, and I wonder if that's when I saw mom. Who knows?
Or I was going to say, if that was your life review and you asked not to do that.
Yeah, who knows? So then I was in a white room, and I was on the far end of a white room, and far end, I mean maybe 30 feet in breadth. But the ceiling, the floors, the walls were all the most perfect white you can imagine, a luminescent, almost pearlescent white. And in this room, there was a mist that was falling all around me, but it wasn't just falling, it was also swirling. And I know this sounds goofy, but I tried to focus on an individual droplet of this mist because I felt like I ought to be able to see this. And the spiritual being that was with me said, your eyes have not acclimated to this new environment yet, but each droplet is a particle of light. And whether we go on to heaven or go back to earth, the light cleanses us from all the impurities, and the muck actually is one of the words that was used that we pick up on earth. Because some people die after having a disease process for so long, they believe it to be part of their identity. Some people struggle with mental illness and believe it's part of who they are. And I was told the purpose of this white room was like a spiritual car wash, to take away all the impurities and the filth and the dirtiness of the world. And what's really compelling to me is this is kind of antithetical to my personal religious belief system, that we go to a room where we get cleansed. And then I was shown a door. Well, I mean, I could see a door at the far end of this room. Again, maybe, I don't know, 25 feet, who knows? I'm so angry at myself. I didn't look at my feet to see what they look like. But I remember thinking, I don't know if I have legs. I don't know how I'm perambulating, but I know if I can move with intention. I can have a desire to move, and I will move. So I pretty much told the angels, out of my way, I'm going for the door. I know what this is. I know what the door means. The door is the border, the boundary, the point of no return. And I couldn't wait to get there. I just couldn't wait. There was no question about what I wanted to do. None. I had zero doubts. So I moved with intention toward that door. And I got to that door, and I paused. And one of the things that was communicated to me, and I'm not sure of the form or the format or the venue, but it was made clear to me if I agreed to return to heaven that I would be healed. and healed of everything, not just the cancer, but the crippling emotional grief that had destroyed me. And it had destroyed me. There's no doubt. I was a shadow of my former self. And at that door, I paused and I put up my right hand to push through the door. I was pretty interested by the fact that right-handed on earth, right-handed in heaven. And again, I thought there's some kind of human-esque thing we take with us. So I paused and I said, is this the divine will for my life? And I had always been very spiritually minded, but when you're in that place, you want to honor God, as the image and likeness, I wanted only to do the will of the divine. So that's why I asked the question. More so even maybe than in life. You just want to do whatever brings the most glory to God. So I asked that question. I didn't even get the full question out, and the answer was immediate. And the answer was no. But whatever you decide to do, whether you decide to go back to earth or go on to heaven, you go with all of God's grace and mercy and blessings and care and love. There is not a wrong decision. And that meant so much to me, because I had struggled so with every little decision, down to what shirt to wear in the morning. And now God was telling me there isn't a wrong decision. And I felt, because the decision about whether to go to heaven or go back to earth is kind of a
big
biggie.
one. Yeah. It's a little bit bigger than a shirt.
Yeah, it's a little bit bigger. So I said, okay, I'm in. I want out. I want to go to heaven. If either way I have God's blessing on this, I want to go. No doubt. No vacillation whatsoever. And then I had a vision, and boy, it was more than a vision. It was like I had stepped into another world for just a second. I had a vision of that RN who had been so solicitous and thoughtful at my side right before I passed out. And I had a vision of her sitting in a hospital supply room, surrounded by linens and supplies and such. And she was sitting on a little metal stool, leaning forward with her head in her hands, and she was sobbing uncontrollably. And she said, through tears, she said, I promised that woman I wasn't going to let her die, and I lost her. And I thought, oh, this is tough. And several people have said, was that concurrent? No, it wasn't concurrent. It was a potential future. And I thought to myself, she's an RN. She looked about my age. She's been doing this a while. She's lost a few. She'll get past this. I'm sure she's going to be just fine. But then it got ramped up, and I felt her pain. I felt that deep grief, that deep sadness. And the only best way I can describe it is just like it hit me right in the solar plexus, right in the chest. And I thought, if I can spare one person that much emotional agony, I have to go back. And I put my right hand down to my side, and my last thought in heaven was, it's going to ruin this nurse's day if I die. And I put my right hand back at my side, and in the millisecond, I was back on that gurney with lots of stuff happening. And I have always had a theory, a very profound theory, that in most cases, the decision to stay or to go is made on a spiritual level. And then the body has to correspond, or the circumstances have to correspond to match the spiritual decision that's been made. And I think that's right. I think that's true. So I was back on that gurney, and it's funny now, it wasn't then. So I'm in this little ER in this white room, or it's just a hospital room. And like I said, they had even called in the receptionist to attend me. Everybody, that room was filled with people.
Wow.
Suddenly we went from leaving Rosemary alone with this one friend to everybody being in the room except my friend. And I saw an angel in the upper left-hand corner of that room, like up by the ceiling. And I saw an angel, and I said, Robert's Rules of Order, we didn't even have a first or a second. We didn't even get to the discussion phase. And I'm back here. What? Wait a second. What is this? And I said, I didn't want to be back here. What was that about? And the angel literally looked at me from the corner and just smiled and said, hi.
Yeah,
that was it. Yeah, she didn't answer my questions. She didn't answer my specific inquiry. She just goes, hi there. Hey, how you doing? So, and when I was putting in, and then, it's really interesting. That little ER, they could not wait to get me in an ambulance. I don't know how much time elapsed. They had already had an ambulance out by the door when early on in this experience. I should have been taken to a trauma center early on, but whatever. But yeah, I felt like, who knows? It felt like it wasn't 2 or 3 minutes before I was thrown on another with a gurney and taken out to that ambulance. And I remember being loaded into that ambulance out in that out in the back of the ER, and I it felt like the ambulance was filled with angels, and they had an oxygen mask on me at this point and lots of IVs. But with this oxygen mask, they had it tight over my nose and mouth. Well, one of these angels in this ambulance kept telling me funny stories. I mean, hilariously funny little jokes and one-liners. And I would laugh. I felt like I was laughing so hard I couldn't do it proper with that ox. So I kept taking the oxygen mask and putting it aside for a minute so I could just laugh out loud, literally. And then the attendant would come over and he'd snap that thing back on and he'd say, "Leave it on." They were not playing.
No.
So, but for the whole ride to the hospital, which was some distance away, I remember I kept taking that thing off to laugh because those angels were cracking me up. And then at the hospital, it was affirmed that my heart had stopped, that I had lost so much blood that my heart went into the VFib quivers and then it had stopped. And they believed I had suffered, they said I had a heart attack. And I said, "Not me." And they said, "No, your enzymes are way elevated, but they're already coming down this morning. So we know it's not underlying illness or underlying heart disease." So that was lovely to have that affirmation that my heart had really stopped. And then I had a couple friends again that stayed with me in the hospital. I was hospitalized for several days. And when they would leave my side, because here I am marginally conscious. I mean, I was still kind of in rough shape for a few days. I mean, I bled to death, it turns out.
Yeah.
The angels would come and stand by my bedside. And it was like they were telling me, "Your friends had to step out for lunch or a bite or to take care of something, but you're not alone. We're right here with you." And they would sing to me. And they sang the most beautiful songs, beyond what words can describe. And I would cry. I would sob from the beauty of the music. And their songs were all about glorifying God and the glory of God and the beauty of creation and love. And I would tell them, "I'm really good with houses and I'm really good with memorizing images and I have my talents. But remembering melody and lyrics is not one of my gifts." And I said, "I'm not going to be able to remember this." And they said, "This is not for you to remember. This is for your healing and your peace and your joy." And they said, "This is our thank you. We know how hard it is to see that and come back. So this is our thank you for coming back." And that is a memory I hope I have for eternity of those angels by my bedside singing to me. And then it turns out when you've been diagnosed by a gynecologist and an oncologist as having stage 2 cancer, you say, "Hey, I was healed in heaven, man. We don't need to start that chemo. We don't need that daily radiation. I am good to
They're
go."
like, "Woo!" They
Exactly.
don't understand any of that.
They don't. And the oncologist actually wrote in my chart that I had
Delusional.
mental illness. And I had to find another oncologist because I did want it affirmed.
Mm-hmm.
I had to find another oncologist in another part of the state. And it took a lot of time. They wanted me. Turns out when you go to a doctor and you tell them, your first time, you tell them that you were healed in heaven, they're a lot more interested in the story about how you bled to death from a cervical biopsy.
Yeah. They're like, sure. Anyway.
Yeah. So they insisted on waiting a couple months, and then another surgery was done. And I had to consent to have my lymph nodes removed because the second oncologist was so concerned that if she found one cell of cancer, she needed to know how far it had gone, because she was pretty incredulous. But they took out some flesh and pieces and parts, and not one cell of cancer was found anywhere.
Wow.
So the lymph nodes got to stay.
Good.
But that surgeon came out of the, like I said, it was 2 months later, she came out of that surgical room and threw her arms around my friend's neck and said, "She's right. There is not one cell of cancer anywhere to be found." And they sent off multiple samples to multiple labs. And I mean, they triple checked and everything they could do. In fact, the thing the oncologist, she's actually a gynecological oncologist, what she said to my friend was, and said it to me too, that my flesh was so pink and pretty and perfect, she didn't think I ever had cancer.
Wow.
So that was pretty dramatic. But the bigger healing was the healing of my soul. After I got home, I flopped down on the floor at one point, and I opened my Bible, and it opened to the 23rd Psalm, and it was like one of the lines was highlighted, and the line said, "He restoreth my soul." And I thought, that's what got healed. My body never went to heaven.
Mhm.
The body that had stage 2 cancer stayed on that gurney. What went to heaven was me, all of me, everything I am. And that's where the healing happened. And that was pretty dramatic. And the other interesting thing, I had a busted knee that had happened shortly after my husband's death. I had something fall on me and busted up my right knee,
Mm.
and it had been sore, and I'd been limping for a couple of years, and that was healed. There were a lot of things that were healed in heaven that have stayed healed. I had arthritis in my wrist. There was a series of things. So after I came back from this, I went home and I sold everything I owned, very incrementally, very systematically. Sold my car, sold my house, and I packed my stuff up in a slightly used Prius, and I moved 1,000 miles due west to start a new life in the Midwest.
Wow.
Pretty
See,
dramatic.
did people think you were suicidal then? Because that's what we're told, right? Suicidal people get rid of all their stuff and they change their life massively, and you
They
just gone
did.
through all this.
Actually, two people called me and said, hey, actually, my dear friend Sandy called me and she said, she always cracked me up. She said, hey, Chickie, are you getting ready to off yourself or what?
That's how you gotta be direct.
Yeah, and I said, no, I finally came to my senses. And it was, people had told me after my husband's suicide, I needed to just move out of the area and start a new life. And boy, that takes a lot of energy to
Yeah.
just sell I mean, I was in my late 50s at that point. But boy, once I came back from heaven, I couldn't wait. I could not wait to just be shed of all these earth weights. Because you know what I realized? I was the happiest I've ever been when I was in that experience, and I had nothing. I owned nothing. I
Yeah.
possessed nothing. And that was the happiest I've ever been in my entire life, far and away the happiest I've ever been. So it was very easy. And when I sold, I sold my mother's beloved couch, I sold some family stuff. I donated all my research materials to a local college library. But as I sold each item, because, I'd been married, I was living in a 1,700 square foot house. There was a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I would stand in front of each item and I'd say a little prayer and I'd say, God, there's somebody who needs this, somebody wants this, somebody this can be a blessing to. Please tell them about this and send them to me.
Hmm.
And may it be a blessing for them that enriches their life. And then, I put it on a local online marketplace, and everything sold very, very quickly. And I made a lot of friendships from the people that came to my house. And then when I put my house on the market, my next door neighbor literally walked over and said, I'll buy it.
Wow.
So it was on the market about 2 hours.
How
And what's
amazing.
really cool? This is a little funny PS. So I was moving 1,000 miles due west in a Prius, and I knew it would take a couple days. So the woman who was buying it was kind of starting over. And she and I became fast friends. And so we're still friends. And I said, look, I've got all the stuff in the refrigerator that you get, the condiments, and I had some frozen food in the freezer, and I had all this stuff. And she and I were about the same age, and I showed it to her, and I said, I can clear this out, and I can throw it right in the trash and, clean up the fridge for you. It's a brand new refrigerator. I said, or I can leave it for you. You just tell me what you want me to do. And she said, oh, Rosemary, it would be an answer to my prayers if you just left all that stuff. That would save me. Because you know how much that stuff costs.
You get it all at once. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was just such a lovely little PS to all this, that she was able to use all that stuff. And so I did. I started a new life in the Midwest.
Wow. How beautiful is this story. People in the chat are really loving this too, and we have a lot of some comments and some things that I want to share with you if you
Sure, please do.
want to hear that. And I'll just let everyone know now too, if you have your own questions that you want to share, feel free to do that as well. We have someone at the very early on in YouTube, Fallon Blue, said that they almost died at 11, and the hospital room that they were in was transformed, as did the people, into a scene from the 1800s, and they were told they were just hallucinating. And I feel like that happens a lot too. Were there people who told you that you were just hallucinating and that this was all just delusion and false, and your brain firing as you die, or whatever they try to say?
Well, that's the beauty part about that brain firing thing. They have disproved those theories that it's
Yeah.
just the brain, because I did not see a tunnel. I was floating
Right.
away in the blackness. And the PS to this, when I went, first off, there's a couple layers to it. When I went, I had stage 2 cancer. When I came back, every cell was gone. Not
Yeah.
one, my flesh was perfect. That's one. And two is I bled to death. When somebody, and I was gone more than 10 minutes, no heartbeat for more than 10 minutes. When you bleed to death, they can't even do CPR on you because it just pushes out more blood. So theoretically, my brain was without any oxygen for more than 10 minutes. Frankly, I feel like I came back with a serious IQ upgrade. I
I was gonna
really
ask
do.
that. Like, was your mind clearer as well? Because you're super clear-minded. It's very obvious.
Oh, thank you. Well, and I felt like I was a smart cookie before, but I do feel like I came back with, frankly, a little more mental acuity. As a friend said, you left as Rosemary V1, you came back as Rosemary V27.
Upgrade.
And
Yeah. Wow.
a serious, serious upgrade. So, yeah, so how do you explain that?
Yeah.
There is no explanation for somebody's brain to have no blood for that period of time and not suffer damage. And, when I first came back, and they've resuscitated me and I opened my eyes, the first thing they said to me is, um, what is your name? And I said, Rosemary. What year is it? 2018. Where are you? And I said a crummy excuse for an ER. That didn't go well. She said, I'll have
They're
you
like,
know this is
wow.
an accredited facility. I know. But, and I know the reason they did that. They didn't know really what they were
You were
bringing
gonna.
back.
Yeah. Yeah. After all that
So
time.
you can't explain that away, that
No.
somebody has no oxygen to their brain for more than 10 minutes and comes back not only whole, but with no damage. And, the other interesting PS to this is the next morning in the hospital, pretty much everything from mid-calf below was still a very, very, very dark blue. It was horrible. It didn't even look like flesh.
Mm.
And it was just that I was still so low on fluids. I was still recovering from this very significant trauma.
Yeah.
And yet I did recover. And I remember early on there was some discussion. There was a lot of fears that I wouldn't come back whole from this. And they did a lot of tests. And one of the things they tested, they did a lot of heart tests, a lot of cardiac tests, because they said that the enzymes were elevated and I'd had a massive heart attack. And I said, oh, no, no, no. The angel said if I agreed to come back, I'd be just fine. We don't need to do
I
these
don't need any of
tests.
this.
And they did them anyway. And what I heard again and again is, you're a very lucky woman. Everything's fine. But if you think about it, suffering that catastrophic loss of blood, how do you reinflate all those little itty bitty veins and arteries and all that other stuff? And my feet suffered no lingering damage, which I've had a couple medical personnel impressed with that nothing was damaged.
Everything was brought back. Everything was restored, and everything was in fact upgraded to better than it had been before. That's amazing. Because, like you said, those cells were not just not cancerous; they were as though they were brand new almost.
Correct. And I asked God about the eyeglasses. I was like, okay, the arthritis in my wrist is healed. The bum knee is healed. The bad shoulder's healed.
Why not this?
High frequency hearing loss is gone. What is up with the eyeballs? What? And I actually prayed about it a lot. And one of the things I was told was it's too easy to become kind of a spiritual snob, a metaphysical snob.
You gotta have some
and this
humility.
is yes, this is my thorn in the flesh because it's very obvious. I mean, it's very obvious. I still have issues, but I am still, as a friend said, you still get your mail here, which is true. And yet and I shared this story. I realized early on, I mean, there are even people in my own family who think I made it up, which is horrifying. And I've heard all the, you were unconscious for a minute. You didn't actually cross over. And that's okay. I know that there are people that don't believe. Have you ever heard of Anna Beam? Annabelle Beam, that's her name. Her mother wrote a book. Gosh, I can't remember the name of the book now. But her mom wrote a book. Annabelle Beam had a life-threatening disease that looked like it was going to take her life at age 10. She fell into a hollowed-out cottonwood tree. And it took them hours to get to her. And her mother, of course, was in a panic because here's this very sick child who's had this horrific accident. Well, they rescued her. And when they did rescue her, she told a story about the whole time she was in the bottom of that rotted out cottonwood tree, an angel was with her and sat with her and comforted her, and that she was taken to heaven in that time. And she came back completely healed.
Wow.
So this does happen. This is not. And so anyway, in the story, Annabelle Beam's mother is trying to tell people about this wonderful event, and people are like, oh, that never happened, and lots of excuses. And Annabelle, this little kid, says, Mom, it's okay. They'll believe. There will be a day that they believe, even if it's not now. And I love that. Right. My job is not to get everybody to believe. My job is just to tell the story.
Yeah, and it's almost like people can't accept these things because of some sort of really weird fear, which I don't understand. Because for me, the most comforting thing is to know yeah, I'm a soul. None of this is, it's cool, but it doesn't really matter. And like you said, the real me, kind of beyond and behind me, like you described as the original, that's always going to be there whole, and no matter what I experience here, I'm going to be cleansed and rebirthed or reborn or whatever. That's the most comforting thing I could ever imagine. So why would you be scared of that? But there's something terrifying for people, it seems like, that they just can't accept this for some reason, and they have to find excuses, like the brain thing, and that's just what your brain does when you die, and all of this stuff. And it's like, interesting, you have to go to such great lengths to dismiss this, when it seems easier to me and more comforting to me to really just imagine, what if it is true, what if it's real?
And there's an interesting PS to this. At the time of my death, I had been seeing an eye doctor every 3 months because I'd been diagnosed with glaucoma, and I had elevated pressures, and they said that my optic nerve was 10 to 15% compromised or compressed. And that's the problem with glaucoma. It presses on your optic nerve and makes it smaller until it makes it so small you can't see anymore. And so I had been on eye drops, and every 3 months I was there having everything checked. Well, I pray about my eyes a lot because I didn't go back to an eye doctor for 3 years. And when I did go back, I was terrified because I didn't know what they were going to say. Because something my eye doctor had told me back on the East Coast where I lived was, you're going to spend the rest of your life seeing me every 3 months. That's just your new life now. Well, when I went to the eye doctor here in the Midwest, I was so frightened because I didn't know what they were going to find. And they said, actually, your eyes are very, very healthy. And I said, what about the optic nerve? And they said, well, it's at 100%. It's perfect.
Wow.
And it's believed that your optic nerve doesn't regenerate.
Right.
So
it's believed a lot of things.
So yeah, it's quite a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, what we are is what goes with us, and what stayed behind on that gurney is not what defines us. It doesn't have control over us. It doesn't dominate us. It's just not that big a factor.
Yeah. Well, it's so fascinating too. I say that to people too a lot. I mean, you can't actually lose anything. It's easier said than like understood, because especially, for example, if your husband commits suicide, yeah, you lost something, like you feel that, and there's nothing that can replace that or undo that. Which actually brings me to a question. Did you have any experiences in heaven or any messages afterwards from angelic sources or otherwise about that? Or did you find, or was it just a feeling of closure that you just had and healing that you just had?
That's a great question, and I meant to touch on that. I had been, there's a Bible verse, Deuteronomy 2:3, you've circled the mountain long enough, time to stop and go north. I had been circling the mountain with the same unanswerable questions. How could he do this? I thought he loved me. I prayed for him every day. How could he do this? I thought he loved me. I prayed for him every day. I loved him so much. And I mean, it's just this endless, I couldn't stop it. Talk about ruminating. I went over this again and again and again and again. So while I had the angel's attention, and this is after I've come back from heaven, I said, so where is he now? Where is my husband? Because I did not encounter any family members. I had the angelic beings, but no family members. So I asked, where is he now? And the answer was, none of your business.
Wow.
And I thought, now wait a second, that's a little brusque for those who keep company with the Most High God. None of my business. And they said, we are to work out our own salvation. You don't need to work out his salvation. And I said, but I loved him so much. And they said, stop saying that, and instead replace it with I loved. They said, when you love, humans tend to get all wrapped up into thinking they have to have a manifestation of that love, that they have to love a person, when our job is just to love. So I was able to stop saying I loved him so much to just say I loved. Oh, wow. And that's a lot. And that when we love, we really do open up the floodgates of light and love to just pour through us. And then there were a lot of questions I asked about him, and they were all answered. And the thing was, it was so liberating. I got out of the ruminations, and I found that I really was able to forgive him and forgive myself, because I realized, really in a spiritual sense, he was free and I was free, and it was going to be okay. And it also gives you a profound sense of the temporary nature of this earthly experience. When I first popped out of my body and I was I guess regained consciousness, I don't even know how to say it. Yeah. I mean, I had been in this deep, dreamless state, and it was like waking up from a dream. And I mean, all 59 years. It was like that had been the dream, and now I was awake. And so when you come back from that and you see this whole drama of, he died and it was so awful and I lived out in a car and drugs and all this stuff, you realize that it never really touched me, you know? It didn't really hurt me the way I thought it had. And I don't want to diminish anyone's suffering because I still cry over him. I still cry in the shower and I still cry on holidays and I still miss him, think about him an awful lot. But it's not a grief that drags me out to the depths of the sea. It's just kind of a sadness. It's very different.
I can relate in a way. I understand people say like time heals all wounds. I'm like, well, I don't know if it's fully like healed. I still feel the pain, but it's there's like a peace with it or a distance from it that's manageable more. But it sounds
I'm a
like
different person.
Yeah, even
Yeah, I'm
more
a
so.
different person from the suicide, and I'm a different person from having seen heaven. I mean, those things change people in profound ways.
Well, this is also an important concept too of that forgiveness and release of him, and that he has his own salvation to deal with, and that, to love is profound, and to really truly love in the most radical sense would allow for people to choose and create their own salvation while still offering them, what you can. And if they don't choose and create it, it has nothing to do with you. And it's just this thing, there's one of the 4 agreements or something that I've loved for a long time. And the one that says don't take anything personally is like probably the hardest for people to really grasp and understand. But that's like this is like the epitome of it, right? Like, don't take this personally. I'm just going to kill myself and leave you behind in this deep grief and agony for a while. But it really isn't personal, as strange as it is. It's always just our own soul and our own path, and whatever we're choosing to experience and why, that's what we're doing. And to let people have that freedom is really radical and profound.
It is, and it's a lesson. Was kind of humbling to say the least. It's a lesson I still have to relearn. There are days I get so depressed and so sad, and then I have to remember where I've been. In fact, I've got a note on my computer and in my car that says, "Don't forget where you've been and what you've seen," because boy, it is so easy. And something the angels told me, this was a big deal. I asked about all the sadness and the grief and the pain he had inflicted, and they said it's been encapsulated. And that meant the world to me because as an architectural historian, if you find a potential contaminant, it's actually better to encapsulate it than try to remove it. And removing it, such as asbestos, you tend to release more into the air. But encapsulating it seals it. And they said all the muck and crap that had happened, they didn't say crap, they said muck and filth had been encapsulated, and it was a thing, and it's there, but it can't hurt me anymore. And boy, was that a big message. That was life-changing also. Yeah. They're not saying this never happened, it never touched you, it's only a dream. They're saying, yep, it happened, it's ugly, it's a mess, it's been encapsulated. It can't hurt you anymore.
It is really beautiful. It's like exactly how you said. You can still look at it, see it. No one's denying it, dismissing it, and yet it's not affecting you actively. It's really beautiful.
Yes.
I love that you have this comparison to the old houses too, that even comes into your angelic experiences.
Well, the other thing that I thought was really interesting is I was floating away from my body. I remember thinking, as I mentioned earlier, one of my first thoughts was, I'm out. I'm clear. I didn't do this to myself, and I'm gone. Thank God, thank God, thank God. I was so grateful, so grateful. I always kept a daily gratitude list, I was like, oh, yay, 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 it's over, and over. But the point is, I remembered my life. I remembered thinking, I'm not going to have chemotherapy, am I? And I remembered thinking, I remembered my husband's suicide and how much pain it had inflicted. So all those memories went with me. And even the Bible verses, I remembered so many Bible verses, they all went with me. And I thought that was pretty darn cool that my 7 pounds of gray matter compressed in my skull is back on that gurney. But I remembered so much of my earthly experience.
I love that you take that with you. And like you said, that is everything that you are is there with you, and you lose nothing at all. There's that time and forgetfulness sort of perspective that you're talking about too, I think is really important, because a lot of times we think about like, well, why do I still have this habit? Like I'm trying to break this habit, and then I forget, and then I go back into it, and then like months pass, and I'm like, oh yeah, I was gonna break this habit or whatever. Like it's sort of similar, you know. We forget how easy it is to get lost in the sort of slow, thick distraction of this world, and to keep our presence of mind and our presence of intention and will is actually difficult. And you know, and then like you said, when you leave, it's like, oh, that was all just a really quick dream actually, but when we're here in it, it's like slow and thick and heavy. It's really interesting.
Yes.
Well, you say here that a friend who is an atheist had an angel visit them actually while you were dead, and that sounds
Yes.
very profound as well. This has affected all sorts of people very directly, it sounds like.
It has. It affected. It's pretty interesting. I get a lot of emails from people because I have a website. I guess I should mention that. I have searshomes.org, but I also have temporarydeath.com.
Oh,
And chapter 1 of my book is up there at that website,
cool.
temporarydeath.com. And I could hardly believe that domain was still available.
Because no one calls it that, even though that's what it is.
It is. But a lot of people, I get my most common email comes from two different, I guess, kinds of people. One is somebody who's lost someone to suicide because they understand that it changes you forever. I mean, there's, while I talk about Rosemary V27, the fact is that person before the suicide is no more. And also going to heaven changed me as well. But I can kind of look in someone's eyes and figure out if they've known trauma because people have a different look about them, just a different ambiance. But the other email I get a lot of is somebody who's lost somebody very dear to them to death. And they just want to know, does life really go on? Is it really like you described, that you wake up and you realize that you're even better than you were before, and even your funny little giggle goes with you? I mean, the people who've buried, children, I get a lot of emails from people who've lost a child, and they just want to know where their child is. Did you really feel that much peace? Did you really feel that comfortable, that comforted, that blessed? So that's, I've written 9 books. Writing is awful. Famous sports writer, I read something, I forget his name, but he said, writing is easy, just open a vein and bleed. Writing is ghastly. And when I first came back from this, several people said, oh, you need to write a book. And I said, I can tell you one thing, I will not be writing a book
Please,
about
God,
this. That is one thing
no.
that's not going to happen. Right. But then I gave a talk in Virginia Beach, and several people came up and said, I wish you'd write a book. In fact, one of the things that happened early on, so my husband's death was April 18th, 2016. And by, I guess, I don't know, a couple days later, my daughter took me to like a urgent care place. And so I'm there with my daughter and a friend, and this doctor comes into the room to examine me. I'm sitting on the examining table looking pretty rough. And this doctor says to me and my daughter, he says, so ladies, what's the problem here? And my daughter says, well, her husband killed himself and my mother can't drink or eat, and she's pretty messed up right now. The doctor, a man about my age, literally reels back, steadies himself on a wall behind him, and says, my Aunt Bertha's husband did the same thing 45 years ago, and she was never right in the head again. And my daughter said, sir, that is not helpful. Can you help my mother? And he kind of snapped back into his professional role. So I had shared that story at this talk I gave in Virginia Beach, and one of the attendees stood up afterwards and said, this is pre-COVID, one of the attendees said, it'd be real good for you to write this story because we don't know how to deal with trauma in the medical world. And that is a good example.
Yeah.
And it's true. After this, my daughter's scrambled trying to find emergency psychiatric or mental health care for me, and it's not out there. I mean, we're waiting times of 5 and 6 weeks. And this is at a time when I'm living in 15-minute increments. So that kind of helped me see that maybe it would be a blessing to write this book.
Yeah.
Because we don't know how to deal with people in trauma.
Nope. No, we really don't. Policemen don't. EMTs don't. Like our whole, emergent facility like complexes, none of them do. And we don't have those resources. And this is why I think it's really powerful for you to be sharing your story, because these types of, when people find things like this in this podcast or this live show or whatnot, or your book or all these places where they can access that, that's a help and a saving grace to them, as well as, you know, the communities that you start to form. You know, like you said, you have all these emails that you get and this website that you run, and I think those are also very helpful, because when we can't find that in our professional world, then we have to find it somewhere else, and those types of things I think are just really so important. So thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. But yes, I kind of got coerced into writing a book.
Yeah. A little guilt tripping there. um, Another question from Jenny is, post the best time of your life, which was your death experience, did you grieve missing that place when you returned? How did you manage grief when you returned from the best time of your life, and manage moving your house as well? I can relate
Manage
to
moving
that.
my house as well.
Yeah, but more
Well,
so the manage the grief of leaving that place behind. You know, do you like just miss it and have this ache? And
one of the things I miss, because I lived in the Virginia Beach area, and they have a wonderful NDE group there. Not to mention the Edgar Casey Association for
yeah, I
Research
was
and
gonna say, it's like
Enlightenment.
tickling my brain. Is this Edgar Case? Okay, so yeah, you have a lot
That's
of really
where
great
I gave
people
one
there.
of my talks. Yeah, I gave one of my talks at the ARE. I miss that, because one of the things I did when I came back from this experience was I Googled stuff like depression plus NDE, confusion plus NDE. I wish there was a bigger community that talked about the fact that when you have been there and you had, I made my decision and I'll live with it for a while. You do feel very sad. You do grieve it. And not a day goes by that I don't think about it. I think about it more than, and you realize people don't want to hear about it. In my neighborhood, one of my neighbors came up to me and said, you've become known in this neighborhood as a lady who talks about death. I was like, wow, that's the takeaway. That's the takeaway. So I try to keep my comments and my thoughts to myself more and more, but it is, you can't, it's just, this is a hard, dense, thick place to live after you've seen heaven. And one of the things I asked the angels upon my return was, when can I go back? Because this is hard. And they said, you got 20 years. So that means I will live until I'm 79, which does make financial planning much easier.
Yeah, when
but know how to budget. It is hard. And I like talking to other people who've been in that experience. I was talking to one friend who had an NDE, and she said she's never been to a funeral that she doesn't look at the coffin up front and think, you lucky SOB.
You lucky bastard. Yeah.
That's right. And you do. You certainly don't fear death. And I know we can't live this life waiting for death. I'm supposed to be living. I'm supposed to be doing stuff. But it is tough. I don't know how to answer how I manage that. And as to moving house, I had friends help me get rid of stuff. Oh my goodness, so many cars and cars of stuff went to Goodwill, and so much stuff got sold. And it was very cathartic to see that stuff leaving my life, and with happy people. It was great. I really enjoyed it.
It is beautiful. I love how you describe how you asked for it to go to, the people who need it and will enjoy it. It's really a beautiful transformation there. I've had similar to near-death experiences in my life, and I spent days and days just crying afterwards because this place sucks really bad. But I obviously am back to a place where I, enjoy leaving. Like you said, I have no fear. I can't wait to go back, but I'm also very aware that I'm not trying to rush that or, kill myself in order to accomplish it or whatever. I'm not going to jump in front of a train or anything. But when it does happen, I'll be grateful. But I was told I'll live till 97. So I was like, God damn it. Like, you really suckered me into this. Like, that's a really long life. So I'm not even halfway there, apparently. And I've got a lot of financial planning to do, if that's true. Someone else asks, Fallen Blue again, do you think when you see death, like I did, because they had a not full death experience, but they, right? Yeah, but they just sort of saw into that area, I guess. Do you think that it follows you until you make peace with it?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Could you ask that again?
I think they're basically saying that they have not made peace with it yet, and they sort of saw death but didn't experience it, saw it really close by and nearby but didn't really go fully into it, and that it sort of haunts them. And do you think that it's going to keep haunting them until they find some sort of ability to make peace with death.
Well, something this people are just starting to discuss, and it's a real thing, is PTSD plus near-death experiences.
Ah,
It is pretty traumatic to die,
yeah.
and it's sometimes kind of messy. And when I came back to my house and got my house prepared for sale, one of the things I had to do was clean that white bathroom where I had almost bled to death.
Yeah.
And I was on my hands and knees scrubbing blood out from the grout and the tile, and I couldn't get it out. I mean, I bleached it, scrubbed it, and I had bled so much and it splattered everywhere. I mean, it was just pouring out of me. And I had a little mini meltdown. I mean, I remember crawling out of that bathroom, and I'm on my hands and knees. I crawled out of that bathroom and I crawled to my nice clean carpet and I just laid on my back and I cried. And I thought, I'm cleaning up my own, the scene of my death,
God.
How many people
Literally.
can say that?
Yeah, very
Or the
few.
scene of my almost death or near death or something. So there is some trauma realizing that. And the other funny thing, I was cutting something with a sharp knife and I cut my finger a little bit and it bled for a bit. And I realized I felt like I was going to faint. And I never was bothered by the sight of blood. But the first time I cut myself, I almost passed out. So, there's stuff to deal with there for sure.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The PTSD from dying, and how would
Yes.
we don't deal with death and we don't deal with PTSD. So you're kind of like right, double.
Very
screwed.
true. That's very
Good
true.
luck. But again,
Because people die in car accidents. They have cardiac arrest. They die after surgery. They die like me from a bleeding to death. I mean, there's a lot of ways to die,
yeah.
and there's, most of them aren't falling asleep in bed and you never wake up. Not the people who come back anyway.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, that's really, I've just never really thought about the PTSD that goes along with that. On many levels too, like you said, all those ways you can die can be so traumatic, but also the coming back from a place that why would you ever want to leave?
Yes,
to
and another
this.
interesting thing, I did go to an NDE conference and met a lot of wonderful people. But one day we sat down to breakfast, and the guy at the head of the tables, I stopped by their table and I said, "Do you mind if I sit here?" And the guy at the head of the table said, "I don't know if we're talking to you." And I said, "What did I do?" And they said, "Well, you came back from death completely healed of everything."
I was
And they
gonna
were still
say,
dealing with heart trouble or lung problems or the side effects of having been dead. So there is a broad spectrum of how you come back from this.
yeah, a lot of people that I've heard about, read about, or had on the show did not have that experience, and in fact struggled for a long time to heal once they got back.
Yeah.
So that is really amazing and beautiful. Why do you think? Have you thought about why there might be that difference? Or
Well, I think part of it is all that prayer that went into my life. I mean,
from others, from you? Yeah.
I started with prayer. I mean, my life started from day one with a lot of prayer. And also, I do think part of it's being raised in the Christian Science faith because I grew up believing God can heal anything. And it kind
I
of
can.
opens the door. Yeah. I mean, the pharmaceutical, oh, am I going to get us banned from
Yeah, I
a
don't know.
platform?
We'll find out.
But there's all kinds of books about pharmaceutical companies, and we have come to believe they are our God. And
Yeah,
I think that's a boo boo.
it's a
I think we all
big,
need help from time to time. I really do.
especially in
You
the
know,
like severe emergent trauma like you were experiencing.
yeah, but I do believe that we really need to open our thought to the possibility of divine healing, regardless of our spiritual background. I mean, because that's something that honestly came to me fairly recently is my body was on that gurney. When I went to heaven, I was healed of all this stuff. So where did healing take place? It didn't take place on a body, a white
Yes.
body on a gurney. It took place in my consciousness. So when I ended up back in that body, all that stuff was gone. And the arthritis in my wrist was kind of problematic because I'm a writer and I type a lot. And the high frequency hearing loss was pretty interesting too, because I remember when I came back from this, I could hear conversations in the hospital down the corridor. And I remember thinking, that's new. So there's so many changes in my body. It was very
Everyone
dramatic.
everyone needs to listen to what you just said like 10 times in a row and really understand it. That the healing doesn't actually happen in your body. It happens at the soul level, on a spiritual level, and that trickles down to your body, your mind, your heart. Everything else is
Yeah.
secondary to your soul.
It is. And you asked why did I get the big healing? I do think it's prayer, and I think it's growing up believing that God will take care of us. After my husband's death, I mean, I had prayed for him so faithfully. I never understood how this could happen to a man who had so many prayers poured over him. He killed my faith along with taking his life. And yet it really came full circle. Like you said, I thought that was a beautiful thing you said. When I was faced with suicidal urges, I did reach out, and I just told people on my website, I would just title a blog, "Pray for me, I'm sinking." And I think people knew what that meant.
Mm. Yeah,
And
it's
I prayed
really,
every night that God would heal me or let me. What was my prayer? Heal me or let me go or let me die. I got both.
yeah, true. You got both, and the choice to, choose what happened next, which is also really beautiful. Free will is absolutely a thing. Well, before we run out of time, I want you to tell us a bit about your book, how Remembering the Light, How Dying Saved My Life. I mean, I know we just heard a bit
Yes.
about it, but whatever else you would like to share with us about it.
Well, it turned out writing it was a blessing
Mm.
because I had to think through a lot of this stuff. And one of the most frequently asked questions I get is, have there been any more revelations? And there have not, but the experience continues to unfold.
Mm.
I think about things that happen and I understand them a little better every day. And it's amazing, kind of amazing what big a presence this has in my life. I was going to show you the cover here. Uh, so yeah, not a day goes by that I don't think about this and remember this. Um, it was a big deal. I mean, it was all a big deal. Anyway, I don't know if you can see.
Well,
There's the cover. See, it's
yeah.
got a nice light, nice bright. There we go. A little bit back.
That's
So yes, but it should be out within. I'm hoping to have it out by Christmas. It's just been a lot more work than well,
it's always
books.
hard work,
Ugh.
yeah. That's beautiful. So we get to order that soon, it sounds like, and tell us about your site again and anything else that you want people to know about.
The website is temporarydeath.com. And an interesting little thing that I think is mentioned, I have a YouTube video. Actually, a woman named Roberta Moore recorded it for me, but I think it's gotten 70,000 views. Uh, One fun little aside of this is when I was discharged from the hospital after bleeding to death, I was told that I would need 2 to 3 months of convalescence before I was really considered healed and back on my feet. And I went in for blood work at the 15-day mark. And by the way, I'd had a friend praying for me. I told my friend, I said, "Yeah, they're telling me 2 to 3 months before I'm back to normal." And my friend said, "We'll see about that." So at 15 days, I went in for blood work. And when the oncologist reviewed the blood work with me, he said, "There's a mistake on your blood work." And I said, "What's the mistake?" And he's actually, it was she at this point. She said, "Well, your numbers are all textbook perfect to the decimal point." And I
That's a
said,
mistake.
2 weeks out. Yeah. And she said, "That's a mistake." I said, "No, it's not a mistake. I'm back to walking every day. I ride my bike." She said, "You're what?" I said, "Well, I ride slowly." I said, but that breathlessness is gone. I feel okay now. And that's pretty cool that they thought, well, the bone marrows need to regenerate and this needs to happen and that needs to happen. But at day 15, my numbers were literally down the column, textbook perfect.
That's amazing. Yeah. It's so, I hope a lot of them took the time to really reflect on that. And like you said, most people don't want to talk about it for whatever reason. They don't want to hear about it. And even when they do, they don't really get into it deeply. They don't really want to hear like the details and the implications and talk about the profundity of it.
It
But I
is.
hope,
Thank you for saying that. It is amazing to me how many people don't want to hear about it, talk about it, think about it, anything. It blows me away.
blows
I
me away
really
too.
thought people would be like, "Tell me more."
Yeah. No, I
But
my audience
nope.
is probably sick of hearing me say this, but I had a teacher, a shaman teacher, tell me like you have to actually stop telling people things. Like you actually have to wait until they ask you because you're damaging them by forcing this information into their psyche. And I'm like, Why? Like, why don't you just want to know? But I've done better. But I'm still astounded, even when you get people to talk to you about it, how shallowly they would like to engage in it is also interesting. Very few people want to. I don't know. It's just so weird. I'll never really understand that. I think there's not
I
ready.
don't either, because I have always been hungry for the things of spirit,
Yeah.
and not everyone is that way. It's been kind of jarring in some ways, and to be discounted as a liar. And I'm like, well, I've got 387 pages of medical records. If I really thought somebody close to me was lying to me, I would say, hey, tell me, what hospital were you in? Did
Yeah.
you feel like they treated you well there? Did what happened with the chemo? Did you go through the tutorial, or did you get a port put in? What happened? I'd ask questions. I
Yeah.
wouldn't just discount them.
It's so easy, though. It's so much easier to discount. It's much harder to investigate and then maybe be proved wrong, right? That's the
Yeah.
danger in questioning. Um,
Yeah.
well, it's such an amazing story. I feel like we barely scratched the surface of it after talking about, people who don't want to go deep. I do. But I know we heard a lot, and hopefully, when your book does come out, maybe you can come back again and we can talk about more aspects of it, or other experiences
happy
you've
to.
had, yeah, and things like that. But I want to always give everyone the opportunity to share their final thoughts or messages that they want to leave the audience with.
Oh my, final thoughts. Uh,
if you could
I don't
leave.
know. I guess people think there's this idea that when you come back from an experience like this, you're in love with life and everything's great and sunshine and rainbows and teddy bears. That has not been my experience. I still find life to be about 4 levels too hard for me to figure out. I still struggle with it. And often at night, I close my eyes and I just remember being in that blackness and how much I love that. So I find my peace in remembering what heaven was like, because I still find earth to be, my mother was right. Being a sensitive soul on this earth is a tough road.
It's quite tedious. That's well said. I'm glad you have that piece to carry with you, however, through that.
Thank you.
And that, again, you're sharing it with us, and it touches so many people. It offers a handout for so many people and offers them a lot of healing. And people have said that in the chat all night too, that this, just hearing about it, is very healing for them. So I'm just so grateful.
Well, that is my closing thought. What comments? I want to hear the comments.
Oh yeah.
How can I read the comments?
There's definitely some on Rockfin and on YouTube, and I'll share with you some of the praise and admiration. Fallen Blue says, thank you so much for sharing your story. I know I could talk with you for days. We also had, let's see, sadness is essential. It's not really praise, but just commiseration. This is so healing right now. # thank you. A lot of people saying their stories feel very similar to yours. Thank you for sharing. Enjoying this. We've also got, you are incredible. This is wonderful. Thank you. Someone pointed out your death age is 79 and mine's 97, and we've got a little number magic going on there.
That's interesting.
Someone said trauma experiencers like yourself and myself know more about how to heal from trauma anyway, infinitely more than the experts do. So it's good that we're out here communicating with people and sharing with them, giving them that option.
That's a really good point. That is brilliant. I hadn't thought about that, but that is spot on.
Right? Especially if we're actually like healthier, not just still in it and, suffering still. But
yeah.
Awesome angels. So good. Someone said, F word to those doctors. They don't know anything anyway. See, we don't get trolls towards us or the guests. We just get trolls towards the people we're talking about. Enjoying this show. Happy listening. Appreciate being here. I think I've got most of the good stuff. Another seriously, thank you for this. And I think I've convinced myself, Gordon says, that some things didn't happen in relation to spiritual experiences and those types of things. And, sort of that, again, heaviness and slowness of being here, you sort of start to distance it and question it and go like, did that really happen? Or did I make that up? Like that sort of thing too. So I don't know if you've had any of that experience with your, what you've gone through, but I can relate And one more, thank you for sharing this tonight, Rose. More people need to hear your story and understand your perspective. Many would be better souls for it.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm glad so many people responded and found such good healing wisdom from you as well, and a lot of perspectives that even if we've heard near death or, temporary death stories before, we haven't heard this in this way, and all of the healing that comes with it is profound. So thank you for sharing that. And
Thank you for the opportunity.
Do you want to share any final thoughts again?
I think you've got them all.
All right.
And thank you so much for telling me those comments. That's part of the problem I have with being a writer is you do this in solitude and you think, is anyone really going to care?
Yeah.
Does anyone really want to hear this story?
Well, especially because we were just talking about a lot of people really don't. But the people who do
Yeah.
are like hungry for it, right? Because it is so rare. We don't talk about death. We don't talk about trauma. And we don't talk about spiritual experiences. And we need to. We need it. A lot of people need it. So it's great.
That's very helpful.
Well, fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing, and this has been your analog, electric, concentric dose of wisdom, according to the returned from heaven, Rose Thornton. Rose, thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you.
Well, come one, come all, and join together in common decency, humanity, and honor. Call it love if you like. Make no mistake that this is your saving grace, your connection to one another. It is only together that you can create the situations and the world that you see in your heart and feel calling you from just beyond where you stand now. You are never alone, and you are strongest in connection. Find your connections everywhere you go. And until you weave a net of immense proportions spanning the world in human connection, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first. Mwah.
Nasty motherfuckers with a hook and a sickle. Brought to you advertisement, bone plated nickel. Fire rate automatic smash from the get-go. Snack on the whack, fermented flesh disco. Abracadabra, archaic altars don't slabber. Hey, making jabbers with reality backwards. Hunting rap nerds, bodyguard collected actors. Munitions are famished, let them feast upon the dapper. Bloody bibs and muddy kicks, feasting on amygdalas. Iron fist, tyrant shit, APO will rip you up. The rhyme rainmaker, vein style backbreaker. Genghis-Khan depleted uranium satellite lasers. Cloaked in anonymity, I know you never heard of me. No rusted tools used for Crowley style surgery.
Dissect a whole set, God body. God taught me to dissect the whole body. When it gets sloppy, I'ma get there. Rhymes rare like steak, get crushed like crates to create 52 states. And it's Baghdad, dust to towels, no rags. Straight milk dash, dust to ash. Turbans while the niggas perkin'. It's on purpose. My service touches the sun's surface, and rainbows touch serpents. My light all night shines so bright. I'm a star for eons. Hollywood's for peons, cause they try to copy the same shit we on. Hey, I ain't done yet. Lungs depleted and can't breathe, can't believe it. Trying to seek it while trying to peep it. It's a secret. Now you're nobody. Label somebody. Trying to claim John Gotti. It's yours truly, God body.